I'm going to talk about a few of the practical considerations, I guess, for how companies that I'm working with and in our experience, how people are trying to address this. And on this slide, I think the first, all but the last bullet point really covers one topic, which is how do you know what you've got? And I think you made a good point about safe harbour, that actually one of the clients I'm working with was in a bit of a better position of understanding what they had, because they'd already had to go through a review of everything when Safe Harbour fell apart. And so they did at least know where some of their key contracts were. But in my experience, it's not unusual. I think the reason why a lot of people are interested in this area is a bit like the reason that people are interested in how do we tackle retention, because it's one of those subjects that doesn't really have a nice answer. And I think there's a lot of work to be done however you look at it. But obviously the key thing is to identify the contracts that you've got, and that will depend on the state of your existing vendor management system. Time for another show of hands. Who's got a comprehensive vendor management system in place now? Ooh, a few people. Okay, about 4 hands went up. Who've got some kind of contract management or contract recording system? And who wants to put their hands up to say, I have no idea? Yay! Okay, well, actually, quite a few people have got something, and I think that's where most organisations find themselves. And I think it's probably a bit like the comment that Belinda made in her session this morning, or wherever it was this afternoon, that it's finding the solution that fits GDPR, not just what fits what's already been in place or fits the current business model. So what kind of vendor management system do you have? Is it one that's managed by the procurement team, which might be the obvious way if you've got a kind of well-oiled machine there for handling your contracts, then the procurement department might have a pretty good handle on that. Legal also might have contract records of the contracts that they get involved with, but they may not be involved with all of the contracts that are handled by procurement or certainly by the business at all. And then we might have this third angle of IT-related contracts which go through a separate review for security reasons. So you could find that the data is in a number of different places. And so a bit like the data mapping we were talking about earlier, how do you pull all this together to produce something that's going to be GDPR compliant, or at least to give you an idea of what the size of the problem that you're facing. So we've got there 3 examples of areas where we know that your business might encounter contracts, but there are also the kind of under the radar agreements, the ones that either for value reasons or for any other kind of reason don't see the light of day, get signed off by somebody on a face-to-face basis, or have developed over time where maybe nothing was ever signed at all. And it's finding out about those. How do you go about doing that? How can you find out about the contracts that are signed sort of at the coalface, as it were? Suggestion is to have a contracts amnesty. So perhaps you have a day where you say, okay, this is the day where everybody puts up their hands and says, I've signed all these agreements, and we bring them all into the centre, and at least then we know what we've got so that we can tackle the agreements. And obviously after that we've got a question of prioritisation, which I'll come onto the next slide. But finding out what you've got, I think, can be a difficult process for many organisations. This is a new area. I think there have been different reasons that have driven the need for records management in terms of contracts, and what we're trying to do now is bring all of that together into one central place, which meets the needs of procurement, might meet the needs of the legal team and your IT security checks, but also can help you to progress all of the GDPR related stuff as well. The last bullet point on this slide it looks like a really simple statement, just one little bullet point that says, make sure your procurement team know what they're doing and have got all the templates that they need to do things going forward. So this is the kind of forward-looking aspect. We're going to come back to looking at how do we deal with what we've got now. But this is we need to make sure that going forward, all of the agreements have the right provisions in that JP was just talking about, so that new contracts that you enter into are as GDPR compliant as they can be. But that's easy to say, but again, how you achieve that when you've got these different sort of web of how contracts get signed in your organisation, it might be a bit more of a challenge than just saying, here's a bunch of templates. So again, it's working with the procurement team and trying to build into the processes that you already have some checks that make sure that the DP professionals, that the legal team get involved in contracts that have a data element. And that might require some time, I guess, to change the culture so that becomes embedded in your organisational practices.